Eco Money on Money FM 89.3.
This is Eco Money on Money FM 89.3 with me, Rachel Kelly. So this week, Singapore International Energy Week, the spotlight has been firmly fixed on how to continue on this journey and the path to net zero and the role that renewables play when it comes to that path and the energy transition. Now, we just need to take a look at some numbers. Developing countries face an investment gap of $2 trillion annually for the energy transition. That's out of a $4 trillion annual funding gap for the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, that's according to data from the United Nations released earlier this year. And it did call for urgent support to developing countries to enable them to attract significantly more investment for their transition to clean energy. But that said, barriers remain. Policy, politics, and perhaps even technology all play a role here. So the question is, how do we bridge this financing gap? Well, let's find out from the largest bank in Singapore and Southeast Asia. We're joined in the studio now by Kelvin Wong, who is the Managing Director and Deputy Head of Energy, Renewables and Infrastructure at DBS. Thank you so much for joining us in studio today.
Thank you for having me, Rachel.
It's my absolute pleasure. Our absolute pleasure. It's great to have you with us. So, question. I've rolled out some figures there that were issued by the United Nations earlier this year, I think in July, talking about the cost of the energy transition. But I want to hear it from you. You know, if you run a quick search online, you'll get numerous figures. What's your take on the cost of the energy transition?
Okay. First and foremost, right, I think what is energy transition? Let's kind of define it in simpler terms. It's really moving a fossil fuel-based economy to one that uses low-carbon technologies, essentially. And the cost, you've quoted some numbers. I have some numbers. I sit on the Financial Industry Advisory Board of the IEA. Right. And the IEA that themselves recently actually quoted that as of this year, $1.8 trillion will be invested in clean energy. But that amount actually needs to go up to $4.5 trillion per annum by 2030. Right. And to put another kind of set of numbers into context, the IMF last year actually estimated that to wean the world away from coal, $29 trillion is actually required, half of which is actually for Asia.
No small change there. So where does this money need to go, and what are some of the challenges in getting these funds out to where they need to be?
Well, I think it's a few kind of aspects to it. There's climate adaptation, there's climate mitigation, and the list goes on, right? If we focus on, say, climate adaptation, right? Climate mitigation. Clearly, there's a lot of investments that need to go into renewables, but not just renewables. I think at SEAL, you probably have heard increasing use of green hydrogen and green ammonia as an example. These technologies still prove to be commercially quite expensive, right, to deploy. So not only just in R&D, but also into investments, into actual projects, into the supply chains, and so on and so forth. And also then the just transition element to it, right? To increase the capacity built or capacity building of government officials around particularly the emerging markets is one key aspect, but also to help the workforce and the general populace who have been, for example, in Indonesia, very dependent on coal or coal mining, coal-fired power plants as a way of life, right? You've got to transition them away slowly into renewables and clean energy.
So are the funds there? I think it was also highlighted during some of the sessions that the majority of growth that we're seeing in the region is, as you mentioned, in Indonesia, you cited the example of coal. A lot of the growth here in Southeast Asia is still fueled by fossil fuels. How do we break away from that? The financing gap is something that has been discussed to no end. So how do we bridge that gap, Kelvin?
I think I speak in the context of Asia.
Yep.
It is well known that in Asia, at least, well-structured projects will get funding. And this has been proven in many jurisdictions. Take India as an example, right? The Indian renewable energy sector, which was quoted in SEAL as well, actually grew by almost 10% just in 4 years. That amounts to about 70 gigawatts. And the reason why that actually happened was because in India actually fixed a key part of the regulatory kind of framework that wasn't working for them, which was the party risk of kind of state governments and so on and so forth. And so they consolidated it and set up an entity called SACI, and then boom, it kind of goes. So that specific example already shows you that money is always available if governments set the right framework to have the right risk allocation between the public and the private kind of setting, right? And that investors can actually earn a reasonable rate of return.
So is it mainly a regulatory issue that we're seeing across the region when it comes to perhaps stalling of funds to infrastructure projects to move transition projects towards net zero goals?
I would say not just regulatory kind of impediments, to be very fair, right? The energy transition also requires a lot of enabling infrastructure to be actually in place. As an example, power grid infrastructure, a lot of these numbers that we were quoting actually do not include the investments needed to actually upgrade grids, as an example, to deal with more intermittent kind of power, right? So the IEA actually published a recent report just about last week on electricity grids. I think something like 28 million kilometers of new wires actually need to be thrown across the world, right? Just to kind of cater for the energy transition. And this, often in the context of Asia, a lot of these investments actually sit with the public sector because these are all owned by kind of the state. The utility companies are owned by the state. But we all know that state budgets are limited. So how do we have more public-private partnerships to enable the private sector to come in and help with, to your topic, the funding gap?
That's right. We're speaking with Kelvin Wong, Managing Director and Deputy Head of Energy, Renewables and Infrastructure at DBS. So to that, Kelvin, tell us what DBS is doing. What are you working on at the moment to this end?
Yeah, I think at DBS, we actually have a vision that if we do not transition with our clients, we cannot transition, right? And so we have always advocated for a fair and just transition. And our success depends a lot on our clients. To this end, we have deployed, and this was stated in our sustainability reports at the 2022, that we have deployed more than $61 billion into sustainability-linked type of clients or projects. Not only that, we also actually help clients by providing more than just financing. So we actually help them with advisory, in terms of setting up even sustainable finance frameworks, if they need to acquire new businesses, new capabilities, new projects, or even divest old ones, we actually absolutely do that. A key example would be actually helping companies in Singapore setting up sustainable finance frameworks and launching green bonds and sustainability linked bonds. Just one area. But on top of that, not just large corporates, we also try and help our SME community, right? To this end, SMEs not only need financing, they also need kind of upgrading of skills. So we actually, DBS, we have partnered with Skills Future here in Singapore for a 2-year program to actually help SMEs upskill their workforce, right? And not only do we do that, we also actually launch kind of more tailored financing solutions. Example, the more sustainable Renovate loan, where we actually assist the SMEs to actually undertake more sustainable type of renovation to their businesses or to their facilities. We also actually assist with a more ESG ready initiative to these SME clients to embark to even first develop a sustainability strategy, right?
And
then implement the action plan.
Yeah.
And then all down to monitoring and then kind of third-party verification and so on and so forth.
And it's critical, isn't it, to take that holistic approach, not just with financing, but another issue that we don't often discuss is the workforce and that significant manpower gap that we have, not just here in the region, but globally when it comes to sustainability.
Absolutely.
CSOs, seasoned sustainability professionals, of which are very few and far between, right?
Yes.
So it can be a challenge when we're looking at the transition, not just when it comes to finance, but when it comes to manpower. So that's how you're helping your clients on that front in terms of funding, financing, but also education strategy But
I'd like to add one more key aspect, right, which is collaboration. So without collaboration, we can't do much as a bank. So we believe forums like SIU actually provide that platform where, based on statistics, over 1,100 industry leaders from around the world actually gather in our small island to actually debate, sign MOUs, to find new collaborators to solve this energy transition challenge that's upon all of us.
Okay, well, Kelvin, thank you so much for all that sharing. Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for today. I'd love to take this offline with you again in the future. Kelvin Wong, Managing Director and Deputy Head of Energy, Renewables and Infrastructure, DBS, talking to us about the financing gap when it comes to the road to net zero. You are tuned into Money FM 89.3.